So we can start our presentation. So today is the presentation on coagulation disorders. So first, before starting the presentation, I'll welcome you all. And this is probably the new experience for all of us to have an online class. And we are continuing with our topic on bleeding disorders, which we have left few days back. And in continuity, we will today discuss regarding the basics of coagulation disorders. So, just to revise what we have already discussed in previous few lectures, is that we should know about the basic or the normal hemostasis, how it is maintained, and regarding the common coagulation disorders, amongst which most common one is the von Willebrand disease, though the severity is not very much in this condition. Another important conditions are hemophilia A and B, which we will discuss today in details. Certain acquired clotting disorders are also being discussed today, and something about disseminated intravascular coagulation. So this slide shows you how the normal hemostasis happens in the body. So this is the coagulation cascade, which involves lot many physiological processes in which various coagulation proteins are activated one after the another, and finally they are going to activate this factor 10, which ultimately activates the prothrombin into thrombin and forms fibrin plug at the site of injury. And with the help of factor 13, this fibrin plug is getting stabilized to form the stable hemostasis plug. So, how this coagulation cascade is being controlled? So, control of coagulation is by positive feedback control and a negative feedback control. So, the positive feedback control is that this is a cascade. This means the one protein which is activated, it activates itself as well as it activates the next protein in the pathway. So that means the thrombin, it activates platelet factor 3, factor 8 and factor 5, and factor 10 activates factor 8 in absence of tissue factor. This can be seen from this table also, that once this thrombin is activated, if thrombin activates lot many other proteins including factor 10 and factor 5 also. Then negative feedback is control is with various proteins which are secreted from liver. This is antithrombin 3, protein C, which inactivates protein this factor 8 and the activated factor 5, and protein S, which acts as a cofactor for this protein C. So in patients who are having this protein C or protein S deficiency, they are having a hypercoagulated states. The tissue factor pathway inhibitors, which inhibits the action of tissue factor 7A complex action. This also acts as a negative feedback control for the coagulation cascade. So how we should screen for these coagulation deficiencies or clotting factor deficiencies? So the important investigations available for this is either we have to order plasma prothrombin time or activated partial prothrombin time. So in the intrinsic pathway, which we have seen that in intrinsic pathway, factor 7A is getting activated, and it ultimately activates the factor 10A. And in extrinsic pathway, which is the longer pathway, the factor 12A, which activates factor 11, then factor 9 is activated, and in presence of factor 8, this finally activates factor 10. So this prothrombin time, this depicts the integrity of your intrinsic pathway. This means whether the levels of factor 7, factor 10 or 5, they are in the physiological range or not. So in patients who are having factor 7 deficiency, this prothrombin time is prolonged. And similarly, this activated partial prothrombin times depicts the integrity of your intrinsic pathway, extrinsic pathway. So the factor 8A, factor 8, factor 9, factor 11 and 12. These are the primary factors in which are involved in the interpretation of this activated partial prothrombin time. And if any of the factors they are deficient, this activated partial prothrombin time is prolonged. Thrombin time gives you an idea about the common coagulation pathway in which this factor 10, 5 and factor 2 These are predominantly important, and it also gives you an information regarding the serum fibrinogen concentrations also. Then these are the final products of fibrinolysis, these fibrin degradation products and D-dimers. So they can also be used as an assay to look how um this coagulation cascade is being controlled. So whenever is excess of coagulation along with the fibrinolysis, like in conditions in severe septicemia where DIC is a common physiological phenomena, so you will also get this elevated levels of fibrin degradation products and D-dimers. Then there are certain mixing studies which can be done to look uh, at the level of an isolated factor deficiency. So in mixing studies, what we will do, we will or the lab personnel they will do, or they will mix the normal plasma with the adsorbed plasma to look for the which factor is deficient. So if the correction is done with the normal plasma only, then the factor 9 deficiency is suggestive. Then if the adsorbed plasma is able to correct the um, abnormal coagulation profile, then the factor 8 deficiency diagnosis is made. If the correction is done by both normal plasma as well as the adsorbed plasma, then either factor 12 is deficient or factor 11 is deficient. But if there is no correction with any of these um, plasmas, either absorbed or normal plasma, this means there are presence of inhibitors or antibodies against these factors in the serum, and the patient is having inhibitors. Then coming on to the individual condition as such, so most common coagulation disorders, they are inherited condition ones, and the one is the von Willebrand disease, which is because of the deficiency of the von Willebrand factor. But since the severity and the incidence of this particular condition in pediatric age group are not very high, and the diagnosis is also very difficult to make, so the prevalence of this condition is not as much as we see in patients with hemophilia A and B. Then there are certain other rarer factor deficiencies also, like hemophilia C if there is a factor 11 deficiency, or factor 10 deficiency, and parahemophilias are also known. Then acquired bleeding disorders can also occur if there is a acquired liver disease or vitamin K deficiency or DIC. And von Willebrand factor, as I've told you, that the synthesis is not only from liver, it can be synthesized from the endothelium as well as the platelets. And it circulates in the plasma in form of large multimers, and it acts as an carrier of factor 8. So in patients who are von Willebrand factor deficient, they can also present to you like hemophilia, because if they're deficient and they are not bound to factor 8, the factor 8 can undergo proteolysis within the serum, and the effective concentration of factor 8 can be low, though the total concentration is same. And it also helps in anchoring the protein platelets to the subendothelium at the site of injury as an initial step for coagulation. Then it bridges the platelets once there is a platelet adhesion to the endothelium, and it helps in forming the unstable platelet plug. The inheritance of von Willebrand disease is autosomal dominant, and the incidence is around 1 in every 10,000, and it is the most common inherited form of bleeding disorders. And the presentation is with the mucocutaneous bleeds. So the most common bleeds usually in the adolescents are either in the form of menorrhagia or hematuria, or sometimes there may be gum or oral bleeds. Then coming on to the classification of von Willebrand disease, there are three major types. Type 1 is the partial quantitative deficiency of von Willebrand factor. Then in type 2, there is a uh, qualitative deficiencies, though the amount of the von Willebrand factor is normal in the serum, but it is not present in the form of multimers, which is required for the effective functioning of this factor, von Willebrand factor. Then for type 3 is the total quantitative deficiency or complete absence of von Willebrand disease. In type 1 and 3, the role of FFP transfusion or the role of transfusion of this von Willebrand factor, which is present in the plasma derived form of factor concentrates, they can be utilized. But if there is a qualitative deficiency, then we have to look for which type of deficiency is it, and we have to treat it accordingly. So sometimes the deficiency might be in the platelet itself. That is known as the platelet type of von Willebrand disease, in which the factor or the receptors for von Willebrand factor on the platelets is deficient. Then coming on to the diagnosis, here the diagnosis is made by looking at the bleeding time, which is markedly prolonged, and we can directly go for the von Willebrand factor antigen assays. Then treatment, we can use desmopressin, which helps in the release of these granules from the platelets. It contain the von Willebrand factor, and it may be helpful in patients who are having a minor deficiency or the partial deficiency. But in patients in whom there is a severe deficiency or complete absence of von Willebrand disease, von Willebrand factor, FFP or factor 8 concentrates are always required. Then coming on to the another condition which is very common in Indian setup and which has a genetic inheritance, especially the males are affected, in which there is a deficiency of factor 8 in 70 to 80% of the patients, and in 20% of the time there is a deficiency of factor 9. So the condition is hemophilia A if there is a factor 8 deficiency, and hemophilia B if there is a factor 9 deficiency. 30% patients, they might not have a family history and there is a spontaneous onset of mutations. So this factor 8 is synthesized in the liver and it is not vitamin K dependent, and it has a half life of only 8 to 12 hours. And that's why the extrinsic factor 8 concentrates, they needs to be given either twice a day or maybe more frequently if there is chances of formation of inhibitors. Then it circulates in the plasma bound to von Willebrand factor and it protects it from proteolytic degradation. This we have already discussed. Hemophilia B, the incidence is around 1 in every 25 to 30,000 patients per year. Again, it is a X-linked recessive in inheritance, and it is a vitamin K dependent protein which has a slightly longer half-life of 24 hours. How this these condition or this hemophilia has been diagnosed and how the treatment has been progressing over years. It's a condition which is diagnosed first time in 18,000, and now over last 30 to 40 years there are uh, various advances in the management of hemophilia with the procurement of recombinant factor concentrates and even longer acting factor concentrates, and the condition has now become a more of a chronic condition, and the patient, they are not now losing their lives because of the deficiency of factor 8. So clinical features which we have already seen that most of the patient, they will have an increased tendency of bleeding, especially diagnosed during infancy or early childhood whenever there are chances of easy visibility or trauma, mild trauma. There may be prolonged bleeding. There could be a soft tissue bleeding, bleeding into the joints. And aura is very important finding, especially the patients who are having repeated joint bleeds in a particular joint, and ultimately the patient might develop a tendency of recurrent bleed in a particular joint, leading on to the formation of target joints. Extensive bleeds or hematomas or deep muscular bleeds or intracranial bleeds are very uncommon in patients. It's noted only on in 1 to 3% of the patients. Classification of hemophilia depending upon the severity, it's classified into mild, moderate, or severe hemophilia, and the type of hemorrhage also depends on the levels of the factor concentrate or the level of factor 8 or 9 in the serum. So both hemophilia A and B are classified in the similar manner. So if the levels are between 5 to 25% of the normal, then the patient is classified as having a mild hemophilia, and severe hemorrhage occurs only following some kind of severe trauma or a major surgery. But if the factor falls below 5% and it's between 1 to 5%, gross bleeding can happen with mild to moderate trauma, or sometimes there may even be spontaneous bleeds. But spontaneous bleeds are common only in patients who are having a severe deficiency. That means the factor levels are less than 1% of the normal. And here the chances of pneumoarthrosis as well as the life-threatening bleeds can also be there in rare conditions. So this is how the patients they can present to you like this. These clinical photographs shows you how the joint bleed looks like or a muscle bleed looks like, or sometimes the patient can have a cephal hematoma even at the time of birth. Diagnosis is made by taking a good medical history as well as clinical examination. So if there is a family history of these type of bleeding disorder in the family, with only the males are getting affected, and even there may be a history of fetal death also because of bleed. So there we need to suspect this condition. And in a newborn, if there is a prolonged bleeding from the umbilical stump, or if there is an formation of large cephal hematoma, or if there is a diffuse bleed at the time of teeth eruption or falling of the cord. So these are the few pointers which suggest you that the patient might be having some kind of bleeding disorder, and we need to further evaluate. For evaluation, coagulation parameters are the one which we order at as a screening test, and in patients with hemophilia A or B, only the APTT will be prolonged. Prothrombin time is always normal. Then the bleeding time is also normal, and if we go for the factor assays, then in patients with hemophilia A, the factor concentration or the factor levels they are less than the normal, and depending upon how much the levels are, we will classify it accordingly. Then genetic diagnoses are also available, and most common genetic defect isolated is the intron 22 inversion. Then bleeding sites, the most common site of bleeding is the joint. So hemarthrosis is the most common type of presentation in which knee joint or the larger joint, which are the weight bearing ones like knee, ankle, or elbow, wrist. These are the major joints which are involved in most of the patients. Then second common site is muscle or subcutaneous sites. Then other major bleeds, including the CNS bleeds, they are quite less common. So only less than 5% of the patients they present with the deep bleeds. Amongst the joints, as I have told you, that knee and elbow, those are the most common two joints. Ankle, it is more common in patients who are less than 1 year of the age, where the weight bearing is not on the knee, it's more mainly in the ankle. Then these are the stages of involvement of joint. So in acute stage, there is a pain, tenderness, warmth, and distension of the joint capsule at the time of bleeding. But once the bleeding has resolved, the stage of chronic arthritis has developed. And because of the irritation and chemical composition of this blood within the joint capsule, there is a chronic type of inflammation leading to chronic synovitis and deposition of its hemosiderin, which ultimately leads into the cartilage destruction and decrease in the range of movement. Third stage has developed once there is a recurrent bleeds in a particular joint, ultimately destroying the joint architecture and leading to the joint destruction and joint instability, finally leading into either fibrous or a bony ankylosis and secondary osteoarthritis. So these are the patients which having a chronic arthritis related to hemophilia, and these radiographs, they in this you can show they show that there is complete absence of the joint space, and there is either a fibrous or bony type of ankylosis. X-ray findings of a hemophilic patient during the time of bleeding can be showing only a soft tissue swelling, or there may be some effusion within the joint which can be due to the hemosiderin deposition leading into the periosteal osteoporosis and joint space narrowing. MRI is the investigation of joint, tries to look for the hemophilic changes. Then CNS bleeds, they are the most common cause of death in the children, causing 30% of the mortality due to the CNS bleeds. Then altered level of consciousness in a patient with hemophilia is an alarming sign. because it might be an early indication of CNS bleeds. So we need to always keep a high index of suspicion in severe hemophilics who are not on prophylaxis and who are having presence of inhibitors. So this is how a CNS bleed looks like in CT. Then muscle bleeds, they also happen in larger group of muscles, especially those who are having a weight-bearing impact like ilius vas, quadriceps, and gastrocnemius. Final replacement of the muscles with the fibrous tissue after an hematoma can lead on to the formation of contractures, and even failure of large bleed in the muscle to resolve might lead on to the pseudotumor formation. So compartment syndrome is again an important condition which is related to acute bleeding in a muscle space, and it can be an life-threatening or limb-threatening situation, and it has to be treated as an emergency. Common site for compartment syndrome are iliopsoas muscles, anterior forearm, and the leg. Other type of bleeds could be hematuria, epistaxis, gastrointestinal bleeds, oral bleeds, hemorrhages in the neck, or retroperitoneal bleeds. So, just to summarize how these manifestations occur, the mild hemophilics they might lead a normal lives and the problem occurs only when there is a major trauma or surgery. Moderate hemophilics might have few spontaneous bleeds, but the bleeds are easily controlled with minor interventions and lower doses of factor concentrate. Severe hemophilics they have frequent spontaneous bleeds and they are always at a risk for life-threatening hemorrhages, and they are the candidates which required prophylaxis and good supportive care. Then complications we have already discussed that there could be a hemophilic arthropathy. Then in patients who are having retroperitoneal bleeds or SWAS hemorrhages, there could be a limb threatening situation, or if there is a CNS bleed, the life may also be in danger. Then there are chances of transmission of the blood-related transfusion infections like hepatitis, HIV, if the patient is getting repeated blood products like FFPs or the first or second generation factor concentrates. Then pseudotumor formation and liquefaction at the site of hemorrhage. This can be a surgical emergency, and formation of inhibitors to these factors. This is an again life-threatening situation where the patient might not respond to your adequate treatment with the factor concentrates. So this is how these patients have these joint complications. There could be the permanent deformity, contractures, and there could be difficulty in um, mobilization. Then how these patients are managed. So management needs the home management as well as the hospital management. So in at the home there are certain do's and don'ts which we should apply. That means all these patients they should avoid participating in the contact sports. IM injections are always to be avoided in these patients, and the drugs which alter your coagulation or the bleeding physiology they might have an adverse outcome once they are given. Then once there is a bleed in the joint, always start with this mnemonic RICE therapy. So in this, R stands for rest. In which this means the limb has to be immobilized as early as possible by application of splint, or you can apply your crepe bandages, tight crepe bandages, which helps in the compression as well as the early absorption of the blood within the joint. Then ice has to be applied along with local pressure to decrease the pain sensation, and the limb has to be elevated from the general body level to facilitates the gravity induced drainage of the blood. Then once we apply all these local measures, early factor replacement is the key to the management. So most of these patients they need the factor replacement within 1 or 2 hours of the onset of bleed to get then best results, and that's why home therapy is advisable if it is feasible, but this is not feasible in countries like India. So as early as possible, the factor concentrate had to be given without waiting for the investigation to come. All the procedures which needs to be done in the patients of hemophilia, they have to be done under factor cover. Some patients might improve with the help of these antifibrinolytic drugs like tranexamic acid, EACA, or desmopressin also. Then routine immunization of these patients against viral infections like hepatitis A and B is also advisable, and counseling of these patients and parents regarding the nature of the disease, how to identify the condition, and how to home treat these patients. This is important. Then, how the factor concentrates are being transfused. So there are two protocols which are being followed all over the world. One is the episode based management, and another um, mode of therapy is the prophylactic therapy. So episode based management is being followed in our country where there is a scarcity of the factors. So the treatment of the acute event or the acute bleed has been done without maintaining the baseline factor concentrate levels to uh, a certain degree, which is the criteria for prophylactic factor replacement, in which the target factor levels are being maintained throughout the year to avoid or to prevent the repeated bleeds or to prevent the bleeds in between. Then they are supplied, they are infused through the intravenous routes, either using a slow bolus or a continuous infusion, with the desired amount of factor being transfused. So the dose of factor to be transfused is calculated by using the formulas. Like for hemophilia A, dose required is always amount of the factor or the desired factor increase we need for that particular bleed multiplied by zero point 0.5 into the body weight, and the multiplication factor for hemophilia B here is the 1.4, because the rule of thumb is that for each unit of factor 8 which we transfuse per kg, the plasma level of factor 8 increases by 1% only, while in patients with factor 9 the factor concentration increases by factor 2%. And how we should target that, how much factor 8 activity needs to be targeted. So it depends upon the type of the bleeds. So if the bleed is in the joints or the bleed is not very massive, then the target factor 8 activity required is around 15 to 20%, and the duration of therapy is around 1 to 7 days. While in patients with extensive soft tissue bleeds or muscular bleed or bleeding in an target joint. So there the target factor rate activity may be around 30 to 50%, and the duration is again depending upon the response to the therapy. If there is a complicated bleed like bleeding from the tongue, neck, forearm, or subcutaneous tissues, then again much higher concentration is needed, and the therapy might be given over a longer period of time. Life-threatening hemorrhages like intracranial bleeds or gastrointestinal bleeds, the 100% of the factor activity has to be maintained over several weeks, and followed by slow tapering to look for any rebound bleeding. Similarly, for surgeries also, if there is a major surgery planned, so the factor activity targeted should be around 100 to 150%, and next 2 to 3 weeks following therapy, the levels has to be maintained as such, followed by gradual tapering. Along with this factor replacement, supportive management including rest until the pain subsides in the position of maximum comfort, splints, they can be either homemade or prefabricated, followed by isometric exercises once the pain subsides or the bleeding stops, good analgesia, avoidance of the drugs which hampers your management, and infusion, home care. This is all very very important. Coming on to the another aspect of management is the prophylaxis. This is the standard of care in the West using recombinant factors which are given 3 times a week for moderate to severe hemophilics to maintain a good level of factor 8 throughout the year, and this will help in avoiding the intermittent bleeds. And lifelong prophylaxis starting with the first bleed itself is the target. And these patients might require a central catheter for venous accesses. Mild hemophilia patients, they might improve only on desmopressin. So this is how the prophylaxis has been planned. Primary prophylaxis is one in which there is the onset of prophylaxis or onset of management without involvement of or without the onset of single bleed itself. And early secondary prophylaxis is after first bleed. If we start on the patient on prophylaxis, here the joint, though it's involved, but there are no permanent deformities or changes in the joint. But once there is a point permanent joint damage already happened, and then we start with the prophylaxis. This is termed as a late secondary prophylaxis. The results of late secondary prophylaxis is not so good as compared to the primary prophylaxis, because here the joint which has already been involved from bleed, they might not improve fully if even if you start regular prophylaxis in these patients. Then comes the role of physiotherapy. It has to be started once there is a improvement in the pain and the swelling, and the patient is comfortable in doing certain movements at a particular joint. Aim of physiotherapy is to improve the function while maintaining the range of motion, increase the muscle strength, avoid joint deformities, and some patients might need a prophylactic factor cover before starting this prophylaxis. Then chronic joints, they are a known complication. This we have already discussed. Inhibitor is again an important complication related to the management. Failure of a bleeding episode to respond to adequate amount of replacement factor. This is the criteria for diagnosis. And the definitive diagnosis can be done by detecting the antibodies, which are usually of IgG type against this human factor 8 levels. The management is either the immune tolerance induction therapy, as we have applied in other immunological disorders, or these patients might respond to higher doses of factor 8 concentrate, or the alternative agents like factor 7 therapy, or a factor 8 inhibitor bypassing agents like FIBA. So these are commercially available products used for these patients, and this can be helpful in the patients. And rituximab is also tried in some of the patients who are having hemophilia with inhibitors. Comprehensive care is the newer approach for the management of these patients with hemophilia, in which involves the involvement of a comprehensive care team, which has a patient, physician, which has a orthopedic surgeon, dental surgeon, the patients who they also need psychologist, and they also need sports physician. So all those members of the comprehensive care team, they help in the management of these patients during acute bleed as well as the prevention of complications. So this is all what we have discussed. Then once we have dealt with the inherited form of coagulation disorder, there are certain conditions in which there is an acquired deficiency of these factor concentrates, or the conditions in which either the synthesis or the functioning of these factors protein, these are altered. So vitamin K, as we all know, is required for the post-translational modification of some of the coagulation factors like 2, 7, 8, and 9 and 10. So these if the patient they are vitamin K deficient, so there may be prolongation of the partial prothrombin time, and there may be bleeding tendencies. Similarly, in patients who are having liver disease or the secondary uremia, nephrotic syndrome, certain malignancies, they can also have this acquired form of coagulation abnormalities, autoimmune disorders, and drugs. So all these conditions they can happen. So this is vitamin K deficiency, in which synthesis of prothrombin complex is decreased and bleeding tendency is there. Causes we have already discussed. In liver disorders, most of these factors they are deficient, along with the involvement or affection of this fibrinogen, plasminogen, alpha-2 antiplasmin, antithrombin. So both the coagulant as well as the anticoagulant proteins, they are being synthesized in the liver. So how this balance is being maintained in a patient with liver disease? it will ultimately tell you how the patient present to you. Then, if there is a impaired elimination of coagulation factors, like impaired elimination of factor 8 involvement in brain deficiency, there may be hypercoagulable states also. Then impaired thrombopoiesis can also happen in patients with the liver disorders, and due to loss of coagulation factors, there could be ascites. DIC is again in a systemic consumptive coagulopathy due to release of coagulation activators on the one side and fibrinolysis going on the another side. So there are evidences of thrombosis in the minor blood vessels and capillaries, along with the evidence of hemorrhages. So, leading on to the ischemic organ damage, and the patient ultimately go into multi-organ failure, and the child or the patient might collapse. The causes of DIC most commonly are severe infections, like there could be mycobacterial infections, there could be meningococcemia, there could be severe septicemias, then certain malignancies like solid tumors, hematological malignancies, obstetric complications, severe hypoxia and shock, trauma, head injuries, snake bites. So all these conditions they can start this cascade of DIC. So in DIC, what we have discussed is systemic activation of clotting leading on to fibrin synthesis and intravascular deposition and microvascular thrombotic obstruction leading on to the organ failure. Consumption of coagulation factors and platelets leading on to the secondary thrombocytopenia and coagulation factor deficiency and bleeding manifestations. So there are both thrombotic as well as bleeding manifestations. Diagnosis is by looking at the coagulation profile and the platelet count. So here platelets are also decreased. Both PT, APTT are prolonged. Prothrombin time is prolonged. We get markers of DIC as we have previously discussed that fibrin degradation products or fibrin monomers are there in the circulation along with the presence of D dimers. Advanced diagnosis can be done by using certain specific investigations like estimation of fibrin monomer forms, then fibrin prothrombin fragments can be estimated, thrombin antithrombin complex concentrates, so and the levels of protein C, protein S they can also be ordered, and because these are deficient in patients who are having severe septicemias, the treatment is based on the treatment of underlying disorders. So if there is a sepsis, we need to give a good antibiotic cover along with the supportive and hemodynamic cover that will help in decreasing the physiological changes. And anticoagulation may also be tried if there are um, deep hemorrhages or thrombosis. Then platelet transfusion and FFP, these are the cornerstone. So this is how we are going to manage a patient with coagulation disorder. So I think with this we will stop short over here, and I hope most of you have understood the physiology behind the coagulation and the problems related to filtration in the coagulation pathway. So with this we will stop our lecture, and I congratulate